University of Cape Town, and this series has really been programmed by my colleague Edgar Petersen, who is on the call, I think. Edgar, do you quickly want to show your face? There he is. Hello. I'll do a short introduction just now, but Edgar, if you want to greet our participants.
Thanks, Harrow. And again, on behalf also of myself and the rest of the team, we really appreciate that you joining us in this little intellectual journey and an attempt to figure out how best we can contribute to the university's summit next month. So, and thank you to Harrow for chairing today.
Thank you. All right. I'm chairing on somebody else's platform. The African Center for City has got a fantastic research machinery and also has, as I see, set itself up for these new times where we do a lot of work in the online and global space. And we have a very different university now than we had previously. So on this platform, I've been asked to firstly give the housekeeping rules of the hosts. And if I recall correctly, Ali, you have to help me here without looking at my crib notes. There are 3 things to say. So whilst the presenters are busy, please take your microphone and camera off. That's the one. The second one is about how to ask questions. My notes, Ali said that the participants can post in the chat whilst we're busy, and questions might be answered in the chat whilst we're busy. I see there's some things coming in through the chat. Yeah, and I see you've just posed the house rules there, so fantastic. And then any questions that aren't answered there will pose to the panelists in the discussion later on. And the third one is about recording. The session is now being recorded and will be made available afterwards. So that's the housekeeping rules. And now I can take a step back and say why we are here before I introduce our speakers. This event has a bit of a turbulent prehistory. Just before the pandemic, the University of Cape Town was going to host a summit on achieving the SDGs in Africa, and that was then in early 2020, with a decade to go to the target of 2030. There were various reasons why we're going to do that at the time, but one of them was that one of the global university networks that we form part would have had all the partner presidents and vice chancellors, the CEOs of the universities in Cape Town. And so we really thought that was going to be a very good event to harness global academic networks, as well as the networks we as the University of Cape Town have been investing in on the continent, to play out a part of our strategy, which views ourselves as a very important leverage point or point of contact between global academic networks and African academic networks, being the premier research university on the continent. Now, things have gone very different in the time since then, but the summit is back and is back as a virtual event. And I think everybody who's signed in today knows that it is happening in the second week of September. Now, when one does an SDG summit, the last thing you want is 17 parallel tracks where everybody is on to their little corner of a topic that is deeply integrative. And so in the program committee, there was a search for a format that would allow us to really think about the SDGs in Africa and what the research intensive universities can bring to that without falling back into the 17 topics, so integrative topics. And Edgar, in his analysis, came up with the circular economy as being one that cuts across a number of these SDGs. And I think that comes out in the concept note that you would have seen, but I think it's good if we could just display that quickly, Ali. get that concept note up so we can quickly scroll through some of the key features of why we think that circular economy is an integrative topic and an essential topic if we're going to achieve the SDGs in Africa. So, I think the text there that you have seen, if you scroll down just a little bit in the first paragraph, speaks to the SDGs that are centrally touched on by the circular economy topic. And it just shows how integrative these SDGs are. If you want one of the SDGs, you can't get it if several others aren't being met. So they come as a package, and you can't get just parts of it depending on your political leaning and preferences without the rest, with some exceptions. But so yeah, right. What a circular economy is part of today's session. So we have a design now building up to the summit, where today we're trying to set the parameters on the big scene. What is the circular economy? How is it being understood by scholars? What is already known about the circular economy globally? How is it being taken up as a concept in Africa? And then how is it being taken up by universities in Africa? That's what we're wanting to achieve today. And I think that was really what I wanted to remind ourselves from this concept note. So if you scroll down just a little bit as a reminder, then today we've got the first workshop, setting the scene. You keep scrolling, that will be followed up. And indeed, there's the agenda for today. And I think that's the right one, because there's been, no, it's not. We still have our first attempt at the opening speaker. So, but if you can scroll past that today, it's been difficult to get everybody lined up quickly. The second one is then on the 31st of August, and that will take a look at the phenomenon through case studies. And we've lined up some interesting speakers there. And then at the summit itself, the two sessions. So if you haven't noted those, please do. And Ali, if you can just also put in the chat just a link where people can find these documents again if they wanted to. Right, so that's the journey we're on. Thank you very much for displaying that. I was given 15 minutes to introduce the session, and I'm kind of wondering whether I should say much more than what I've already said prior to handing over to our speakers. So I'm quickly going to pull up some crib notes here to see whether there's anything else that should be coming from the chair before we listen to our guest speakers. And I think actually not. Let's listen to our speakers first, and then we'll bring what we thought we after into the discussion at the start of the discussion when we take your questions. So our first guest speaker, or to set the scene, is Ester van der Voet. Ester is a professor at Leiden University in the Netherlands. And has been in and around the industrial ecology academic community globally for quite a few years. I've known Ester and had the pleasure to work with her and call on her, I think, as an external examiner at some stage, in this global sustainability transition that us industrial ecologists have been tracking for a while. And I'm delighted, Ester, that you can join us today to give us your take on what do we mean by the circular economy in this journey of sustainable development. What has it changed as a concept in how we understand where we're going, and what is just hollow rhetoric? So Esther, if you want to share your slides and take us into the topic.
All right. Thanks for the kind introduction, Haro. I'll try to share my screen. Share. So, do you see my screen now?
Yes, we can see your screen.
Yes.
Good. Now it still has to go to presentation mode. Then I'm all set to go. Thanks for the kind introduction, Haro. My name is Ester van der Voet. I work at the Institute of Environmental Sciences of Leiden University. I'm also a member of the International Resource Panel, where the topic is basically how to manage our system of resources in a sustainable way. Circular economy is obviously an important concept for that. And this is basically the resource challenge is the whole reason why we are thinking now of circular economy and concepts in that same area. It is very simply summarized like this. This picture you see represents extraction of materials at global level from 1970 up to around now. And you see that in that period, this extraction has more or less tripled. And yeah, this leads to a lot of unwanted side effects. It leads in some cases to supply issues. It leads to a lot of waste that is being generated, and it leads to all kinds of environmental impacts. This trend, as it is shown here in this figure, shows no sign of slowing down. And that is what we have to deal with in the future, this ever increasing resource extraction. So the discussions in the International Resource Panel are mainly about this topic. How will we manage to have a sustainable future in view of these hugely rising trends? And if you look at the Sustainable Development Goals, which are a key thing in your series of workshops, then you see that resources are at the heart of them, really. In the picture on the right, you see all the development goals, and the ones that are related to our use of resources have a dark purple rectangle around them. So you see that's many of them. There's only a few that have no direct relationship with resources. And the picture on the left shows the expectations for future resource extraction if we sort of continue to do what we are doing right now. So then it will continue to grow and end at a level of that is already more than twice the amount that we extract now in 2050. And that is related to sustainable development goals in a complicated way. There's a number of those SDGs that are about eliminating poverty, growth, decent circumstances, work. All those SDGs imply an increased demand for resources in the future. On the other hand, there's the environmental SDGs like life on land, life on water, climate. Those SDGs would really require a substantial reduction in material extraction. So there's a big tension between the social and economic SDGs and the environmental ones. And that is sort of the thing that we have to address, and where the circular economy can play a role. In discussions of the International Resource Panel, sometimes the idea is that the use of resources is a bad thing and it should be abolished. that is not so. It's a good thing because it brings all kinds of prosperity, it brings development, and yeah, you cannot deny the world its development. But it's a bad thing in the sense that it causes all of these problems. So what we have to do is find a way out that enables at the same time this further development and takes care that all the environmental SDGs are met as well. Well, the sort of mantra of the International Resource Panel is decoupling. So basically the statement is, okay, we have to continue to develop, so well-being will rise, economic activity will also rise, and probably resource use, well, has to rise as well to at least allow for basic welfare conditions in developing countries. But at the same time, environmental impacts and environmental pressures, they have to go down. So you see in the picture on the right, different types of decoupling depicted, well-being decoupling, so that well-being is decoupled to some extent from resource use. And you see resource decoupling, where economic activity is decoupled from the resource use. And then there's impact decoupling, where economic activity is decoupled from environmental impacts. This is, of course, easier said than done, because so far you see that yeah, when economic activity rises, then also resource use rises, and of the concurrent environmental pressures rise as well. So how can that be done? Well, circular economy is presented as a road towards decoupling. On the slide you see as one of the roads towards decoupling, between brackets, because that really refers to the topic of today. What exactly is circular economy? In some definitions, it's really very broad, and then it's, well, sort of the only road towards decoupling. In other definitions, it's more limited, and then it's one of the roads towards decoupling. There's a lot of differences in the definitions, as you'll see in a minute, but in the end, it really doesn't matter so much as long as we're clear on what needs to happen. And for that, it is really important to have an understanding of the system of resource extraction and use in society. Yeah, as we say in the industrial ecology field, society's metabolism, how society extracts, processes, uses, and in the end discards resources. If we have that understanding, then we can maybe see our way forward to a sustainable resource use, whether we call it circular economy or otherwise. While the definitions of circular economy have a lot of variation, there is at least a lot of agreement in all those different papers that are around on the topic on the primary aim of a circular economy, and that is reducing the need to extract new resources. So really the extraction should go down. And that, if we manage to do that, then we will be reducing supply-related problems. We will be reducing waste that is being generated at the end of the life cycle of those resources, and we will be reducing environmental impacts. In some wider definitions of circular economy, other aims are mentioned as well, like economic innovation, like creating new jobs, even like sufficiency, the idea that we do not need so many resources as we're using now. Degrowth economics is also in some of the definitions, and even notions like local self-sufficiency. So we should live on a small scale and provide for ourselves on this small scale. So there we really go from quite far away from the problem to a solution. Well, that may or may not work, but is certainly not the only one. When you expand the concept too much, there's a risk, and that is that it loses its meaning. And if it does that, then it's bound to disappear as a concept again. But it also, circular economy, I think it has a great potential for outlining the next major transition. After the energy transition comes the resource transition. In fact, there are transitions that have some relations. Now for the definitions, well, there's a lot of them, as I already mentioned. Some are quite narrow, and they say, well, circular economy just means closing loops, therefore recycling. And there's also very broad definitions that circular economy is a completely reinvention, so to say, of our economy and our whole societal system. The Ellen MacArthur Foundation, the figure on the right comes from their website. They are a key player in the whole area of circular economy. Their definition is the following: a circular economy is based on the principles of designing out waste and pollution, keeping products and materials in use, and regenerating natural systems. So the whole idea of that it relates to the way we use our resources in the form of products and materials is there, but also it's wider because it says something on regenerating natural systems. A paper that I often use also in my teaching is the paper by Kirchherr et al. They reviewed 114 different definitions of circular economy. You see a few more of these overview studies, and always they review really a lot of different definitions. It's very difficult to say, well, this definition is right and this is wrong. There is no right or wrong. It's just, what do we agree on in the end? One of the things that they came up with is the 9R framework that is in the picture on the right. I like that very much. It covers basically everything that is possible to do at the level of products and materials. Or to speak with the MacArthur Foundation, keeping products and materials in use. So it's from the sort of say the society's metabolism, more the technical side of things. It's a comprehensive framework, and this is one I use a lot. That doesn't mean that the other things are irrelevant. You see that generally rather broad definitions come out of searches, and the society's metabolism is then the start, but it's acknowledged that in order to implement all these things, changes need to be made in society in a wider sense. So new business models, changes in behavior, government policies, all those things are needed to implement all the more technical R options. Then indicators, what you see out there also in the sense of indicators, that is one of the first things. If you have a new policy, always the first thing is indicators, development of indicators where we can measure success. Well, this is a picture of one of the speakers of this afternoon, Willi Haas. Here he represents, based on the material flow accounting framework, how resources enter society, what is then done with them, and where they end up. And also to what extent they are being rerouted into society again after they have become waste. And this is really sort of a pessimistic picture. Only if a little bit is actually recycled. Most of it goes to waste somewhere. And then if you think about this pessimistic view, then you have to realize a couple of things. One is that it includes also fossil fuels and biomass for food. Those resource flows aren't linear by nature. There's not a lot you can do about it except phasing them out. Well, for fossil fuels, we are in the process of doing that via the energy transition. But biomass for food, yeah, we just need that. And then there is the point that the whole product level circularity, like lengthening the lifespan of products, is invisible in schemes like this. That happens all in the gray box of the stocks. The only conclusion that can be drawn is that, primary is about the size of primary material extraction. And that is even only at the global level, because if it's about trade, the sub-global level, then you don't know whether it's primary or secondary. And this is
3 minutes if you can.
Oh, okay. I'll hurry it up then a bit. This is another such indicator. It's published by the Circle Economy Club in their report, the circularity gap. Their message in that report is we are going from bad to worse, and they base that on the gray flow down there, which is recycling flow, which is the amount of waste that is actually going back into society. But it's something that you cannot conclude from an overview like that, because a lot is invisible here. You can't see what happens at the product level. It's only recycling of waste materials that you see here. And it doesn't allow for things like stock built up in developing countries that still need that. So it ignores all of that. So I think indicators like this have a limited value. So what we do need is a better understanding of society's material system. And therefore, we need to know what happens to the materials after they are extracted, and how are these material flows related to economic development. And that means a shift of attention from flows to stocks as being key for circular economy. And that's related to the concept of urban mining. So basically what happens to the materials after extraction is that they are stored in our societal system instead of, we dig down mountains to build new mountains in society where all these materials are stored. Those are the stocks in society that can form the raw materials for a circular economy. Stocks are expected to grow as well as flows as a result of economic development, but stocks may saturate. That is actually something that has been seen already. If the economy is growing, welfare grows, then at a certain moment it's enough, and the stocks per capita do not grow anymore. And when they do, there we have a chance to really close the loop, as is depicted in the figure here. Here you see the dynamics of the Chinese residential buildings. The black line represents the stocks, the green the inflows, and the red the outflows. You see the green line fluctuating like crazy. That is already in the past. That's the huge building surge that happened in China when they built up their stock of buildings. That's now already down a lot. And you see slowly the outflow, which is the waste material, you see that rising. And the interesting thing happens around 2035, where actually the outflow is starting to be just as big as the inflow, and there you have a real possibility to close cycles. This is, the final message. Back to the resource challenge. What we need to do is reduce primary resource extraction. And that can be done by several things. Material level circularity, keeping materials in use by recycling them after the product's lifetime has elapsed. Product level circularity, where you keep products in use longer. Substitution, replacing one material with another, if that can reduce environmental impacts. Efficiency, doing more with less. This can be done in industry as well as in design of products. and even sufficiency. So a mind shift away from happiness equals to have more stuff. This is, yeah, sort of the suite of things that are relevant for a sustainable resource use. In some definitions of circular economy, they're all encompassed, others just a few of them. My own definition would say the first two, but whether or not they're in there, all these strategies are important for a sustainable resource use. So these are some sources, and thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Esther. The seminar will move on, and we'll have a discussion later on. We want to get a couple of inputs lined up. If there are questions to Esther, you're welcome to pose them in the chat. In the meantime, without drawing attention away from our next speaker, who is Willi Haas, who was mentioned on one of the slides. And I've had the great pleasure of working quite closely with Willi for much of the last year, trying to get a big picture together for South Africa that he may or may not mention in today's talk. We want to just ask Willi to give us a little more of an insight as to what the status quo of this thing called the societal metabolism at the global scale, and also then at smaller scales, in as much as he can do that. So Willi is one of those interesting people who's managed to do what some of us engineers might have dreamt of doing but never did. Start life as an engineer but transition into the social sciences. And he works in Vienna at a place called the Institute for Social Ecology, and really has been deeply interested in this thing called the social metabolism. Willi, I hope I've introduced you well enough. He has just relocated back home after spending a most unusual sabbatical in the Cape here with us. Yeah, there's a profile for Willi. Willi, do you want to try to unmute and also share your slides?
Okay. Thank you so much. I hope I'm on air.
You are, Willi, although your slides are doing the thing where we get to see your next slide and your current slide.
Okay, then I have to just check. It's better?
That's correct. Good.
Okay, thank you so much. Thank you for your kind introduction, and I'm happy to be part of this workshop. And I just want to jump into the issue. So I'm looking into the global and African economy and into the societal metabolism, and we'll look into linear and circular flows. And I think it's a really nice kind of continuation what Ester van der Voet started on that issue. So what I'm presenting is as far as South Africa is concerned, based on research I have done with Haro and other people in the team, and that was funded by the South African roadmap. And I want to go to the next picture and just start with something to get it to a very grounded idea. That is what Kenneth Boulding was already saying in 1966, that he said in the article the economics of the coming spaceship Earth, and his diagnosis was that industrial society acts like a cowboy economy, where a herd can simply be moved to a new pasture and once the grass is grazed. And he says instead, humanity needs to acknowledge that the Earth is a single spaceship without unlimited reservoirs of anything either for extraction or for pollution. So I think this is a very strong picture, and I think it makes it very clear when you have just a spaceship and you have to manage the resources that are there, and when you release something, you need to consider that what you release might fall back on you. And so when I take this picture and think about it, what are the lessons or sometimes the misconceptions, I want to sketch out a few issues before I go into a more material kind of discussion of our physical economies. The first one, many times, circular economy is reduced to a waste management issue. And this is not a useful picture, since on the one hand, material and waste flows are intertwined with energy flows, and each conversion step in society is associated with losses. So we need always a metric that can capture these kind of broader issues, so that we have a spaceship kind of view on that. Then both extracting resources and releasing waste and emissions exerts pressure on the environment, and therefore we need a metric that is not just measuring percentages, circularity, it's measuring tons as well. I mean, we have seen that European Union is more circular in percentage than the global level, but when you look in per capita figures, you can see that the output to nature per European is much higher than maybe of other nations where the circularity is not as high, but outputs are still lower. So that's not all to look at the percentage. And then when we look into the environmental discourses in the 80s, and that was quite important when it comes to recycling and going away from a throwaway society. And we can see that with all the environmental summits and all the issues that were raised at that time, this didn't impress at all the size of material and energy flows. I think Ester has shown this already. And this means really that the transition towards a sustainable circular economy requires a fundamental redesign that goes beyond marketing exercises of the past, maybe of the present, but at present there are more kind of initiatives that are very promising. And we really have to avoid these rebounds, so that because things become easier, cheaper, or whatsoever, that we can use more of them. And we need to be very careful about not cementing linear structures by improving the wrong issues and hindering something that needs to be changed in a more fundamental way. So a real challenge where barriers need to be taken seriously and addressed. And I think in the redesign of societal stocks to deliver in a slim, maintenance, poor and long-lasting way services without leaving anyone behind, there are a lot of kind of opportunities, especially for Africa or African countries, to think about it, what kind of decent jobs can be addressed with that, how can we address the inequality in society. Yeah, so there are a lot of links when this redesign and reconstruction is done in a proper way. And now I want to go to a global perspective and have a short look into the biophysical dynamics that we can see here to have a deeper understanding what needs to be addressed in future. We have here a picture, a Sankey diagram, is so-called, from 1900, where we can see a lot of biomass has been extracted and used, and biomass was both for energy use and for material use, and only low amounts of minerals were processed. We had a circularity rate that was almost 50% at that time, considering only the climate or carbon neutral biomass. When we look into the 1950s, we can see the picture is almost unchanged, a bit reduced recycling rate, but at the same time far higher flows through the society. And when we look into the 70s, we can see a huge drop in the circularity rate, and this stays more or less the same with biomass shrinking and the socioeconomic cycling. So the cycling within the economy of metals, of construction minerals is increasing, but not compensating too much for the reduced biomass flows, who have a potential for kind of circularity. So that is the picture of what we can see over the last 115 years. And just this one issue, the advantage of looking at in a kind of black box is that we really have the right measurements. As Esther was saying, as soon as we want to improve something, we need to go into the detail. But at the end, all measures we take within the black box needs to show up in a reduction of resource extraction and in a reduction of emissions and waste. So when we look here into the percentages, how the input cycling rate has developed, we can see here again, before 1945, it was a throughput society. So the ecological circularity was above 40% and contributing a lot to the circularity. Low amounts of construction minerals were partly circulated, and metals were in very slow loops since there was a lot of cascadic use. In the time from 45 to 72, we had this change from a throughput to a stockpiling society. So we have really a lot of stocks, and again, as Esther was showing, as long as the stock's growing, we have big difficulties, but as soon as we can limit stock growth, it's really something where we can harvest a lot more on options how to circulate materials. In the 72 to 2002, the eco-discourse is strengthened. There was throwaway society, recycling society were the big images. Biomass lost relative importance. It was growing, but relatively less than the other material flows. And the growing socioeconomic cycling compensates for this reduction in biomass flows. And when we look into 2002 onwards, it was especially the emerging economies, especially China, who were driving the infrastructure expansion and programs, and this was really imprinting on the global material flows. So more socioeconomic cycling at that stage cannot no longer compensate for the decline in biomass. And when we look into the 1960 onwards, we can see that linear flows stay by and large at a quarter, as you can see here in the diagram here. But the growth in absolute terms is the bigger problem, and this is what you can see in the next picture. Here we have enormous increases in the material flows, and you can see here that in the last 13 years, the global inputs were increasing by the 1972 inputs. So we put everything on top to 2002 that we were consuming in 1972. This is really a growth that needs to be addressed, and where a continuation of this kind of growth path is not feasible, especially when we look into renewable energies. That would not work at all. When we look on the output side, here we have a bit slower kind of growth, since a lot of material is bound in stocks, and we have almost 1 teraton, so 960 gigatons bound in the stocks and they wait for becoming waste. And these are, of course, very important flows that need to be looked at, how that can be utilized for the circular economy. But there are big kind of differences in the different world regions. In some areas, we have huge growth phases where we have little waste from the past, and there we can't utilize a lot when the demand is so high. And we have other areas where we might have a shrinking of the stocks, where it's important what to do with the waste that comes out from shrinking stocks. So these are quite challenging issues, and it means that stocks play an important role. And when we come to the South African perspective, I show this picture here where we have a population of about, we even gauged the population and said it's about 3 megatons in South Africa. The livestock is about 7 megatons, and the artifacts in South Africa are about 2,000 megatons. So per capita, these are 30 to 40 tons. And when we look into the picture of South Africa, we can see it's really characterized by this kind of extractivism economy here. We have quite a high amount of extraction, where the more pure material is exported. It's mainly metals and coal. And we can see that quite some material is left in the country. When you look here into the, on the right side, this is quite a high level of waste you have in the country. And even emissions are partly related to the exports you organize here. And we looked into several issues beyond recycling. It was the reuse, where we tried to make a first estimate for South Africa, and we could find quite some substantial areas. And I'm sure if we would do more research, we could find even more reuse. So reuse is when products are used again and not just the material that is built into the products. So what we can see here as well is that the circularity rates are not very high. And this is due to this embeddedness of the South African economy in the world market, where South Africa provides resources for the world market. We can see here that while on the global level we have 25% of circularity, including the biomass in South Africa, it's only 7%. There's a methodological difference that in South Africa the method was done differently, so maybe the 5% would be higher if we would only apply the same kind of metric. And on the output side, it's a very similar picture.
Willi, if you can try to wrap up in the next 2-3 minutes, please.
Yes, I will do so. So one issue I want to highlight is the issue of the stock aid. So what in South Africa goes on stocks, it's about 50% of what is extracted in South Africa. In the EU 28, it's 60%. And in China 95, it's 71%. In China 2015, it's 87%. And when we look at the global average, it's about 55%. In per capita terms, South Africa has a very low issue to stock, and I wouldn't argue for that in any other world region, but I think it's very important. If stocks are the ones that deliver services to the people, then this needs to change. And as soon as we discuss it in the context that South Africa might need to step out of the extractivism pathway, there might be a lot of stocks and infrastructures that can be used by creating decent jobs in order to create stocks that might deliver services to a broad audience in South Africa. So shifting priorities in the national development model, sooner or later that will be necessary, since South Africa will not be able to contribute to the world economy if the world economy has to decarbonize and will go more in direction of circularity. So it needs to look for a different development model and needs to step out from the export of non-renewable metals and coal in the long run, needs to change the power generation that is dependent now on coal. So with these two, it's highly vulnerable to future changes on in the global scale. Related extractive waste and coal emissions are about 50% of outputs to nature. So there is a huge potential, and a proactive strategy that is not just focusing in South Africa on production and export, but focusing on a system level and looking how that can contribute to South African jobs, to South African services for the society. It means that new businesses in the service sector could emerge, decent jobs for all skill levels directed at stronger domestic economy, and lower environmental impacts could be the result of such an approach. So it's a substantial change, mainly in mining, agriculture, transport, urban planning, the power sector, and small services. I think is something that needs to be discussed in South Africa. And this needs research and innovation that is redirected to this kind of system level. Yes, and thank you for your attention now.
Thank you very much, Willi. Sure. To get such short time to take the audience through 115 years of numbers of what is known about the global economy. It's quite a tall ask, and then to also throw in some of the exciting insights for South Africa itself. I'm sure we can take some of that into the discussion. But this webinar and a series of engagements is about the SDGs in Africa at a larger, for the whole continent, not just South Africa. And so we'll move through to our next speaker to take a look then at what is happening around the circular economy in Africa. At this point, there's two things I want to quickly do. So the one is I'm going to be introducing somebody that I actually haven't interacted with. So Bezawit, I'm going to actually rely on your CV being posted, your notes. But I want to say that this is not just an academic endeavor. And indeed, it was Edgar who observed that in some ways the academy seems behind civil society in realizing just how important the circular economy is. And so the importance of knowledge co-production between the academy and civil society and other sectors is so important here. So we're delighted to have somebody here who brings an African circular economy from Ethiopia, who is trained in the sciences, but who's been working outside the academy in many ways, as far as I understand. Elizabeth, do you want to take over and take us, to help us gauge, position ourselves for this journey that we're on from your vantage point, please?
Thank you, Haro. Good afternoon, everyone, and a pleasure to meet you also in person online. And I'm also very glad that it is not an academic engagement only, because even though I was trained as a natural science expert at Addis Ababa University in Ethiopia, I never worked in that field. So it would have been very difficult for me to engage. But I was involved with policy and programmatic level, and over the course of the past 15, 16 years, I've learned concrete actions are always backed up with science and data. Figures and numbers are always important, and that's where the research and knowledge generated from the academics is key. So having said that, I didn't prepare a slide because I was just told that it's a 12-minute reflection on what's happening in the continent. As you've said, I work for the African Circular Economy Network. It's a non-profit organization based in South Africa, but we do have a representatives from 100 representatives from like almost 38 African countries. Since 2016, we've been trying to promote the concept and principles of circularity in Africa, and we've been trying to do it both at the awareness level by giving seminars and sharing experience and case studies, but also working concretely with development partners like the African Union, the European Union, and other relevant organizations who are trying to design the circular economy roadmap for Africa, I would say. So unlike Europe, the advantage is the disadvantage for us on this continent, on this part of the globe, is we don't have a consolidated roadmap like the European Union, but the EU is working on it. So that's basically what we've been doing. And we recently launched a foundation where we try to find solutions to move to the ground level, like with projects and activities, hoping that those things would be translated into business models and market systems. Just to put in perspective of what's happening in Africa, the mega trends are the ones which are really highlighted are more from public sector-led development approach. Now it is more of a public-private partnership approach. In the continent, instead of being purely consumer-based continent, it is now moving or trying to leapfrog to producing society, like industry parks, zones are always accompanied with figures that say rapid industrialization is taking in the continent. Emerging economies, the same story. The majority of them are if not middle income, at least they have now tried to find ways to address their poverty level. Rapid urbanization, it comes with the population boom, so it's inevitable that in the year 2025, 1 out of 4 African nation would be living in the city. So there is a need for addressing those urbanization also. And most importantly, the emerging effects of impact investments are really highlighted in the form of either ESGs or even impact assessments. It is no longer acceptable or affordable for the continent, so that investor just comes and then at the expense of extracting resources and infinitely is no longer the trend. So all these shows that there is some kind of a movement, but it can also accommodate circularity to be an opportunity to make the development sustainable, inclusive, fair, and equitable for all involved. Not to mention the biggest threat of the planetary crisis, I would say, for the 21st century are climate change vulnerability, biodiversity, and natural capital depletion, pollution. All these creates not only challenge but opportunities. And how can we do that is what I'll be trying to point out, like in bullet points, I would say. How can we do that? How can Africa embrace this kind of development approach to be part of the transformation? First and foremost, I would say, is the developing a national legislation or development strategy, I would say, so that it can embed circular principles and concepts in its design. This will help the development to be harmonized both at the regional level and also at the global level, so that a collective commitment can increase the impact of this kind of development. The second and the other thing we should always consider is that the transition should be inclusive and fair. That's what I was trying to mention at the beginning. The issue of capital, the issue of technological gap, and the issue of financing shouldn't be something that excludes Africa, but includes finding a way in such a way that it is an inclusive kind of approach would really bring a win-win situation for all involved. That's because the economic potential of circularity is it's highlighted, I would say, in all the development sectors, and it's the need that it should be highlighted articulately and contextualized to the African context would help to improve the economic competition, enhance economic growth, create jobs, and of course, natural capital or human capital or even economic capital. So just to give you a thematic figure, like a indicative figure, I would say it's actually estimated like 1.8 trillion euros would be generated for the European economy in 2030 if the continent embraces circularity. We might not be able to do that for Africa, but the figures might not be that far, honestly. So it's just to give you that circularity, the potential of circularity in improving the economy. The second and the fourth important point I would like to highlight is currently the market, the global market is driven by consumers' demand. The consumers are now demanding for products which are sustainable, green, or made out of something which is not socially unacceptable or non-inclusive or those kind of things. So there is a need to embrace those kind of consumption patterns and production trends so that we are part of the global value chain. We design a business models and market systems so that the global value chain would include Africa. Whatever we produce on this part of the continent, if we are going to end up exporting it, we have to meet the standards and requirements and the need and demands of the consumers on the other side. So you can't just send something which is made out of unsustainable material. So those kind of things are driving the market, and circularity can actually really bring a difference there for us to be competitive. Then, of course, the private sector is key because injecting quite a good financial amount is required to transform to circularity, and the public sector might not be able to cover all or absorb that demand. So the obvious and the low-hanging fruit is the private sector, and the private sector, it might not be that exaggerated, but almost 90% of the economy is driven by small and medium enterprises. And most of them, I would say, are informal. So it could start from formalizing them, incentivizing them either by tax or even any kind of incentivizing or stimulus package, which includes the SMEs to transform to circularity, could help them to produce products and services which are considered to be circular, I would say. Partnership is key. I mean, we really don't have to reinvent the wheel. Everybody has been doing a lot of pieces and parcels of what the whole circular loop is. But how about finding commonalities and complementary from what we have been doing with different sectors so that we come to a common vision and center, I would say, which could also include, the partnership could also include innovation and technological adaptation and contextualizing. This is where the academic sector or the knowledge hub would bring an added value. For example, a business accelerator or an incubation hub is a place where university students come to learn how to, make use of their skills in such a way that is transformed into monetary values. It's no longer the era where everyone goes and get hired by the government and do the 9 to 5, 11 job. But then the trend is that the young ones to be challenged and finding innovative solutions. So that's where academics come in, giving them that platform or niche where they could exercise, aspire, or even produce templates and products. So that's where the key role of academics could be, in my view, so that they could produce a generation of young innovators and business entrepreneurial young people who would be using their skills in the industries firsthand. Last but not least, I would say measuring impact. It has been said quite a lot by the two past presenters, but the thing is, I also want to restress it, that one, because unless you know what you are managing, unless you know what the amount and the quality and the quantity is, you can't manage the impact. So measuring how circular a product is, or how circular a system is, can actually be able to generate figures and data what can convince both the policymakers, the stakeholders, the private sector, the business entities, and also the general society. Because everything is linked with the indicators: number of jobs created, number of jobs, income generated, number of universities addressed, topics researched. The number is always accompanied with something concrete that could be used to attract and convince the decision makers in a more tangible way. So I would also want to trust that one again. Last but not least, I saw on the note that I was also expected to say something about what is ACN has been doing in this one. So our organization, together with the think tank in Europe, has been doing, called Trinomics, has made a report, or produced a report which highlights or kind of makes an assessment of the scope of what the continent have, what can be upscaled, what are the barriers and bottlenecks. I think I've highlighted most of them, but basically what we try to do is identify what are the sectors which would actually really bring impact in a very short period of time, so that the continent can actually be transformed in a shorter period of time. Which countries are really in a good path of embracing circularity, and which ones are in the emerging sector, and which ones really need to be pushed. And of course, the products and services, which products and services needed to be addressed. Those are the things that the study has addressed. It's actually a country report for continental report for the whole of Africa. And then we had 8 for different African countries, which you can access on the website. I'll share the link on the chat box. Thank you for the opportunity. And on behalf of ASN, I'm very happy to be sharing with you what we have been doing. Thank you. Back to you.
Thank you very much, Bezawit. And I hope our audience members have been taking down notes and formulating their questions to you for the discussion. So yeah, because that's really what this is about. How can the universities develop research agendas that work with what civil society has been trying to do, what's working, what needs to be scaled up, what new knowledge is needed, what innovations are needed. So yeah, let's hear it in the discussion later. We had hoped to get another perspective on advocacy in the African context from Dr. Mao Amos, who works with the African circular economy. Now, let me not get the terms confused. Ali, if you want to help me here, I'm just trying to get my notes up again. The African Circular Economy Alliance. But Mao is not able to join us for today. And I think that's given the other speakers just a little bit more time. The last input that we're getting before we're getting into discussion then is from the Ellen MacArthur Foundation, who Esther had mentioned, and I think all of us know is a household name in circular economy globally. And we are, well, we were delighted to discover that they have a desk that focuses on the role that universities have to play in circular economy efforts, and that desk in particular is led by a Cape Townian, a graduate of our university, Reniera O'Donnell. She's not able to speak directly to us, but she's recorded herself, and they've been doing work specifically with African universities. So we don't need to reinvent the wheel, but let's see whether we can listen to Reniera's input as the last part of setting the scene. Ali, you'll play that for us, please.
Thank you for asking me to speak today, and I'm really sorry I can't attend in person. As UCT alumni, I'm delighted to be part of this conversation, and will join in when I'm back from holiday. So my name is Reniera O'Donnell, and I am the education lead at the Ellen MacArthur Foundation. I'm going to make the assumption that most people know who we are as an organization, but just in case you don't, the Ellen MacArthur Foundation is a philanthropically funded charity with a single mission, and that is to accelerate the transition to a circular economy. So we do this in three main ways. We develop and promote the idea of a circular economy. We engage and inspire key actors in the system, and we mobilize system solutions at scale globally. We've been around for 10 years, and we work primarily with businesses. If you're going to change the economy, you need to get business and industry to change. We work with governments and institutions because business and industry can only change in so far as the legislation and strategic frameworks around them allow them to. And we work with academia because if we're going to change our economy, we need people with new knowledge and new skills to be able to apply it. We currently have offices in the UK where I'm based, despite my wonderful background, which I'm sure you all recognize as Boulders Beach, just outside Cape Town. Brussels, we have an office, Beijing, New York, and in Sao Paulo. So my portfolio covers all the work that we do in supporting the inclusion of circular economy in education, both at school age level and then at higher education level. So not only do we work with higher education institutions globally on their curriculum and research agendas, but also how they operate as a business, so how you manage your campus. We are particularly interested these days in how students are leading the circular economy agenda, and also how universities can act as lighthouse demonstrators and leaders in the circular economy agenda. We have a growing network of universities we work with, and if you go to our website, we profile those that we see as doing really, really great stuff in the circular economy space, and showing those who integrate circular economy across teaching, research, campus management, student action, and the leadership agenda. And increasingly, and particularly at a school age level, we're working alongside organizations who are either developing curriculum or in fact disrupting curriculum. So working with lots of our businesses, for example, Lego, in thinking about how we can use their educational tools or their networks to engage young people in the circular economy agenda. So over the past 2 years, we've seen the number of circular economy research centers, which is globally, grow from 4, which were identified in a piece of research that we did in 2018. And I think at last count, we had 23 that we knew about globally. In London alone, so there are over 30 courses across a number of different universities where circular economy is integrated into the curriculum, and that is growing. So we have seen a rapidly growing education and research agenda in the circular economy field. So what are we doing in Africa? Well, we haven't done much in Africa over the last 10 years, but more recently we have, and that's really only because as an organization, we've been quite small, we can't do everything all at once, but as we're growing, we're starting to explore other geographies. So more recently, we've been doing more work in Africa. I'm hoping that by the time you see this next week, because I'm recording earlier, that you will have seen that we've started to publish some papers on Africa. And then my program that I am leading across the continent is we've been funded by the Marva Foundation to work with the African Leadership University over a period of 2 years to do a number of different things. So we are working with the African Leadership University to feed circular economy through their teaching, through their emerging research agenda, through student ventures, how they manage their campus, and really just helping to support the university put circular economy on their agenda and really to help them put themselves on the agenda as one of the leaders in the circular economy space on the continent. As part of this, and to support the African Leadership University, we are doing a bit of a landscape map. So looking at how can emerging research agendas support circular economy across the continent, which is why this conversation today is so relevant. We are looking to build an African subset of our higher education network. So looking to identify those universities across the continent doing great things in the circular economy space. We are, and as part of that, we're doing that so that we can not only bring kind of our global higher education conversation to the continent, but really start to bring African universities into our global conversation. We have a higher education day every year, and the next one will be in June 2022. And we hope to have a really great presence from the African continent. I think, you know, a lot of the universities in Africa are quite young and progressive, and it's been really fantastic being able to take that kind of young thought leadership in the higher education sector into our global conversations. We look forward to doing more and more of that as time goes on. So some of the other work that we're going to be doing as part of this program is we're running a couple of direct to learner programs, or we call them direct to learner programs. The first of those is going to go live in September, which is a 7-week webinar series aimed at 13 to 19-year-olds, so school kids, specifically from across the African continent. And we'll be looking at introducing them to the circular economy and then taking them through a series of learning programs on different material flows and how that resonates across the continent, bringing in some expert speakers and showcasing some really great case studies. There'll be weekly challenges for them to take part in, and we've actually joined forces with Inscape Design School, and they're sponsoring some fantastic prizes for the overarching Circular Design Challenge, which is going to run as part of that program. The second piece that we're doing that's directly to support learning about the circular economy across the continent is we have something called Inside the Circular Economy Focus on Africa. That is going to go live in the first week of October. And we're really aiming to engage postgraduate students and kind of young or early stage professionals who are working in the circular economy space and who are interested in the agenda. We're aiming to get at least 1,000 people through the course. And again, it's a 7-week program. It's going to have live webinars. We have reflection sessions. There's loads of peer-to-peer learning. And as part of that, we will be building up a network of circular economy practitioners across the continent, and not only showcasing some great stories from the continent, but also bringing kind of some of our global perspective in. So that's going to go live at the start of October. We're running both those programs again in 2022. And then for anyone who has taken part in Inside the Circular Economy, we are going to invite them to apply to what's called From Linear to Circular, which, COVID allowing and fingers crossed, we are able to run as a face-to-face really intensive networking program, the first of which we hope to take place in either Rwanda or Mauritius at one of the ALU campuses in April, May next year. So that's kind of really exciting. And I guess the last part of the program that we're doing is really looking at how we can bring the kind of higher education African circular economy conversation more formally into our network. So how can we link people in our network with the right institutions in South Africa? One of the great examples I think that's going to come out of that is that there is a newly formed Council for International Fashion Education, which has been pulled together to transform fashion education on the African continent. And one of our key circular economy academics is on the board. So we're currently thinking, like, how can we leverage the access that we have to these sorts of really fantastic global networks and people and bring that to the continent? But equally, how can our global networks really learn from how circular economy is being applied across the continent? So, one of the practical examples that we have done to date to start this program and how we're planning on building it, we have started doing some train the trainer sessions. So we had our first one with ALU staff. We had about 50 of the staff turn up on the call, which was really about introducing the staff to the circular economy, showcasing our kind of resources that they can use to be able to build circular economy into their teaching, and taking them through some of our, we now have online exercises, obviously. We also have some in-class workshops and exercises that academics could pick up and use. So we did a session with 50 of the ALU staff, and we're going to do a follow-up session in December. And we're going to bring in some of our mentors from universities around the globe who've already put circular economy into their coursework to share some of what's worked and what hasn't worked. We've been supporting the African Leadership University in identifying which research projects should be taken forward and funded as part of this program. We, as I said, have been collaborating with Inscape and looking at how we can really engage teenagers across the continent in a circular design challenge. And also we've done some work in exposing their students to circular economy. So working with them and thinking about how circular design could feature more broadly across their teaching landscape. We currently have 3 African higher education institutions on our website. And in case you don't know, there is an International Society for Circular Economy, and I would encourage everybody to join that if they're not already a member and become part of the kind of global academic conversation on the circular economy. And I think Edgar asked me to reflect a little bit on what we've discovered so far in terms of critical research, training, and thinking about how higher education institutions can build priorities. I reflected a bit on this. It's actually quite hard. Research is quite hard to track, and I'm not sure that we fully understand the landscape of what is already being done. So I'm really hopeful that being part of this conversation, we can contribute and we can also learn from that. And I think what we've picked up in terms of the teaching is that there just isn't as much circular economy being taught across the universities in Africa that we have been talking to. So I think there's some real opportunities to elevate into upstream solution teaching across multiple course areas. So globally, what we're seeing is a move from circular economy being taught in basically 3 disciplines. It was taught in business, it was taught in design, and in engineering. And up until 2 years ago, we would say those are the sorts of areas where you would find circular economy. And I think over the last couple of years, what we've really seen is a much greater focus on multidisciplinary teaching and understanding that we really need to have circular economy pretty much taught to every single student. And in fact, one of the universities, I'm sure you've all heard of the London School of Economics, they are currently working with us to look at how to build a compulsory course for all first-year students. That's every single student that goes to the London School of Economics. They will have a module on circular economy. So I think globally, we're starting to see a real move to understanding that we should no longer be teaching economy and economics in the current way, but we should be shifting this thought process to being the kind of circular economy being part of every student's agenda. I think the other thing that we've picked up is the context is very different. I mean, I've had an amazing week this week filming for our teen webinar series. And what's come out really strongly in the stories from Africa is how the circular economy is not something that a business has gone, oh, we should save the world. Let's go and pick on the circular economy. That looks like a great framework and we're going to tick all the boxes and that's fantastic. It really has been stumbled upon almost by accident, as in companies are starting to change the way that they work to meet socioeconomic outcomes, to deal with inequalities in a very different way, to create jobs. And the circular economy is what they land upon. And I really love that difference. I love that we're coming at this from a completely different angle. So I've had the most amazing week, and I've got another day of filming in a couple of weeks' time, and I can't wait to share some of these stories globally. And I guess the other thing to reflect on is that I don't think we have a sense yet on how important the circular economy agenda is at institutional level. So we are getting contacted more frequently by African universities, particularly from South Africa, actually. So the University of the Orange Free State, the University of Johannesburg, UCT, have all, Inscape being a design school, have all started to say, actually, this is something that we are thinking about more strategically. We're looking at how we are linking programs together, but it's certainly not as widespread across the continent, or certainly that we haven't found it as widespread across the continent as we're finding, particularly in Europe. So we're seeing a lot of the European universities are picking this up as an overarching agenda, particularly around the net zero conversation and the climate change conversation. So I'm really interested to talk to more universities across the African continent, find out who's doing what, where, when, and how. And I think one of the other things that we found globally that makes identifying circular economy teaching and research quite difficult is that it doesn't always come conveniently labeled with the circular economy like stamped on it, right? So what we find is that we can easily identify that sort of stuff, but loads of people are out there teaching aspects of the circular economy, but not labeling it as such. And there's nothing wrong with that, except that if you're trying to take a strategic approach to becoming more circular in the way that you teach, or the way that what you're researching, or the way that you run your university, the more you can tell the story about how different threads of teaching and research link into that agenda, the stronger that agenda and that story becomes. So that's something that we're starting to see happen globally. And I guess we'll need to get a sense of how strong that interest is coming across from Africa. And I suppose, the last little piece, and I kind of alluded to it, and I'll pick up on it again, but it's, I guess globally we're seeing a real link between climate change, net zero, thinking about your procurement, thinking about how you tackle emissions that aren't energy related. And as institutions, we're seeing a lot of institutions globally going, actually, the circular economy provides that framework for us. So I think it'll be, I don't know how that is going to land in Africa. And I guess we're really looking forward to the next couple of years at a minimum in being able to share those conversations and learn as much as we can hopefully bring to the table. So hopefully that gives you a flavor of what we're doing and some of the things that the Ellen MacArthur Foundation is going to be looking to support and bring together across Africa over the next couple of years. And we'd like to do this working with everybody who is working on this agenda. So like I said, I'm really sorry I couldn't be there today. I know a couple of my colleagues are on the call, so hopefully if you've got questions, they can jump in and ask and answer them. But I will be joining back in these conversations and certainly attending the conference later in September. So thank you very much and enjoy the rest of your session.
Right, wow, very well recorded session there. And in closing, Reniera said a couple of her colleagues are on the call. One of them who coordinates the African universities work, Rose, has already posted a few resources. Rose, do you want to add anything? And maybe if there are other colleagues on the call too, do you want to just open your cameras and just wave at us, add something? Check in whether you're there, Rose. And that comes without any warning. So if you'd rather unable to unmute. Okay, right. So that will be centrally controlled. Ali, I wonder whether you might be able to help with Rose. Yeah.
Oh, I've just been called Rose. I'm not Rose, I'm Sarah. But I'm unmuted. I'm the cities lead at the Ellen MacArthur Foundation, but also from Cape Town in South Africa. So been listening in and also happy to answer any questions.
Hello, Sarah. And there is Rose.
Yeah, and there's the real Rose here. Yeah, and I think Reniera has summarized most of the things. I shared the link. I mean, I was trying to type and then I pressed enter, so the messages are quite fragmented. But I shared the link of one of the programs she was talking about, which is called Inside the Circular Economy, and which is starting in our on the 6th of October, and it's going to focus on like early career professionals, entrepreneurs, and everyone. So please, if you're based anywhere across the African continent, like any country, please register your interest. So when registration opens, we shall send you a prompt to actually register, but also share with those ones who are based on the continent. Those ones who are not based on the continent, we're very sorry. Another program will come and we'll be sharing about it. And yeah, and great to see you, her. I think we've had some emails. I see quite names that I'm familiar with on the call. If you have any questions, Sarah and myself will be able to take them up.
Thank you so much. Right, and that does conclude the first part of our webinar today. We've had the inputs, and now it's going to move across to the sense making on behalf of you, the participants. Yeah, before we do that, let me just, as you're thinking about your questions, let me thank all the speakers for the efforts that you've made to try to get this discussion going and to bring your perspectives and your experiences in through your presentations. Thank you, Bezawit. Thank you, Ester, Willi, and then Reniera and Rose for helping us to set the scene. This is maybe also a moment just to give the audience another moment to thank Ali, who's been doing all the hard work behind the scenes to line up the program, to work with the speakers, to make sure there's bios, to convey the expectations and so on. And of course, to thank Edgar, who's seen the importance of that and who's kind of put his analysis in of why it's so important to do this at different scales, why it's important to do that across a range of disciplines. And we haven't seen all the academic disciplines on here today. So, you know, yeah, there would be more, and why it's so important to do it with the non-academic partners too. But that said, and I still haven't seen a question in the chat, does anybody want to raise a hand and speak, you know, pose a question to anything that you've seen today for clarity, or indeed to get the framing of this discussion underway? And there is one from Edgar. You can read it, Bezawit, or do you want Edgar to say it and elaborate on
yeah,
it?
I can just very quickly go through it. Yeah, Bezawit, thanks so much. That was really helpful. I was very curious, the country studies you've done to date. So I know you said you worked with a European research partner on that, but what has been the level of interest and engagement from African governments? Are you seeing openness, willingness to engage, or resistance up till now? Thanks.
Thank you for the question. No, so the study was done in collaboration with the ASEAN network leads in African countries, and the response they got, or the interviews or key informants they got, were from the government people themselves, and experts and interested individual business components in each country. So that shows there is interest for governments to be committed and to transform. We also did another study called where like kind of an assessment also, which is done by an organization together with an organization called Footprints of Africa, but that one is specifically focused on case studies. During that study, what we realized is that businesses are very much interested to embrace circularity, and some of them have already done that and want to learn from each other also. So the openness, the need for, or the demand for engaging and creating partnerships and coalitions is definitely there. And the study was done with the real life case scenarios. So you can also access that a study also on our website. Plus it is also country-based focused, like with the map, the dynamic map. So you can see which regions are actually really engaged in, well, ahead of time in engaging. Thank you.
All right, thanks, Edgar. Hopefully that's answered your question. And then I see Sarah's given us another resource to some studies that have been done. And what I'm seeing there is sort of studies at, I think, what we call the meso level, the sort of sector level. So, you know, Esther, I'm not sure whether you kind of gave us that thinking framework of the macro, the micro, the meso, and the micro scales. You know, the work at particular product levels, the micro, and then the sectors, and maybe the industrial estates, and then the sort of macro work that Willi so well exemplifies across nations and for the whole globe. But yeah, Sarah, if you want to add anything to the value of working at that sort of meso scale and the studies that you've already seen, maybe, and maybe a word on just why it's important to work at city scale, because Edgar put that in there, circular economy at different scales. So
Yeah, I can do that. I think maybe the first point that I would make is that there isn't a lot of really good circular economy research that's been published in Africa, probably up until last year, where the African Circular Economy Network was so involved with these 8 country reports and the continental report commissioned by the European Commission on circular economy in Africa. And then the work that Footprints Africa has done, and now this work that we've published, there has been very little really that's published on circular economy in Africa. And there are a wealth of examples of the circular economy in action. I think because we can recognize that circular economy is embedded into a lot of traditional practice in Africa, but that's not published because it's not kind of normal part of everyday normal life. And I think that's also why African Circular Economy Network, which I also volunteer with, and Ellen MacArthur Foundation and Chatham House, ECLI Africa and University of Lagos, and Footprints Africa, we've all been kind of so passionate about wanting to bring new examples and cases into the published world for people to reference and to build upon. I think all of the work outlines kind of a bunch of questions that still remain. Obviously, there's a big lack of quality data that can be used to help identify intervention points for national governments or for city governments. And I think that's kind of one big need. The one need is to really show, to help grow the evidence base that circular economy is already happening in Africa, and we don't want to lose the good practice, but also the data that governments would like to be able to do evidence kind of based policy making on. And then from my perspective, working with cities, I think cities are really critical in the circular economy transition, because as a place, they bring everything together. They're engines of economic growth. They bring together the business sector. They bring together universities and academia. They bring together civil society. So you kind of have all the actors in one place, but also because cities are where the impacts of our current linear economy are most acutely felt because of waste and pollution, because of climate change impacts and all of that. So city governments can also play quite an important role then in accelerating the transition to a circular economy, recognizing that there needs to be this alignment between national government and city government. But yeah, so that's why I would say that cities are important. And I think I've now answered all of your questions. Haro, is that right?
Thank you very much. And it's,
can I just add to that,
yes,
Haro?
please.
Esther?
Yes, please, Esther.
I'll unmute myself, make myself visible. Yeah, I agree with the previous speaker that the city level is really very important. The whole resource challenge is global level. So that is, in the end, it should all be good at the global level, so to say. But the global level can't do anything. It has to come from national governments, it has to come from municipal governments and levels in between. I see here in Europe, at least, that cities are really, and they want to, they're really engaged in wanting to contribute to ideas of circular economy. Cities are not just hubs of people and institutions, they're also hubs of materials. So the urban mine is there. That is where the local level responsibility starts. Now, it's a bit of a pity that the kind of work that is needed to get all the products repaired and the materials back into the economy is not very sexy or fancy. what you see at the municipal level is that they start up things and they call it innovative, and then they want to make pieces of art out of lemon peels and things like that. And then they have a feeling, oh, look, now we contribute. But the contribution, in fact, is much more down to earth. That is a good waste management system. That is recycling facilities. That is repair shops. That is, waste collection systems. Those things, they are really the sort of the groundwork of the circular economy. And that all happens at the local level.
Thank you very much, Esther. There have been two provocations thrown in. The one is from Edgar, whether there is an economist in the room. Willi, I see your hands up. You might want to respond to the second question on what do speakers think, about the research questions that are necessary, or you might want to just continue this importance of the city level. So Willi, over to you.
Yeah, no, I just wanted to add on what Esther was saying. I think one important issue is that energy and material is very cheap. And as soon as economies develop, labor is very expensive. Yeah. And I think this is something that is really a big stumbling block for a change. So I think it would be so important to have education and skills and develop much more in the direction how to get things repaired on really in huge areas of Africa. I think that there are a lot of skills, but as long as the material is taken out of Africa at such a low price, there is no really appreciation of this. And the other issue I wanted to raise is that I have seen in so many African countries, so many great initiatives on a local level where material is really not wasted, because people appreciate material a lot, yeah? And so before it gets wasted, there are 4 or 5 steps in between. What needs to be done is in countries like in South Africa, for example, is that at municipality level, it needs to be understood what is really done by the people and how can they be supported to do that more easily. Yeah, sometimes there are stupid regulations or there are things how this is hindered. So one issue is even on the municipality level to go on local initiatives. What is reused? I remember this bricks issue, yeah, that there are so many bricks in South Africa that are not wasted, but taken out, cleaned and sold again, yeah, things like that. I think there would need to be an assessment what kind of support these people would need in order to do that more easily and with more appreciation.
Thank you very much, Willi. And Edgar, I wonder whether that's partially answering some of your questions, although not from an economist, but somebody who does speak about labor and the cost of labor, and also about regulation at the municipal level for making things that are done informally, more, to make them happen easier and to be the things that the local government actually affirms should be happening. And I think those are questions that are, I think, quite central to the mission of the African Centre for Cities. If I may speculate that, but some of you may want to come in on that. So where are we? There's still a question out there as an economist in the room. And then what do the speakers think are the key research questions? So Bezawit and Ester and Willi, and maybe Rose for Reniera or Sarah, what are the key research questions necessary for the research agenda? And it was so great to hear how much work the Ellen MacArthur Foundation is doing into the teaching side. And yes, we need to take that up into our work at the university. But yeah, we're asking this also from the perspective of being a research-intensive university. What are the open questions? What do you don't know yet? Who wants to take a go at that from our panel? And the participants, you are still invited to either raise your hand or put another question into the chat.
Let me go first. Mine is not actually a research question or agenda, but I think something that really needs to be addressed is or explained in a more articulate way would be what does it take to really stimulate the innovative capacity of the youth or university students in the African continent. Because circularity at the end of the day is about designing the products and services so that they don't end up being waste in the first place. So, and that's also what is the missing piece in the continent. It's not about the end of pipeline treatment or waste management, but how do we not end up creating it in the first place? So it's just something that I always question myself with. What does it take?
Great question, Bezawit, and I guess you would be observing sort of the. Let me maybe ask back the kind of materials or products that, because this is a product level question, right? That need redesign. So we have the very dominant local food systems, although we're seeing increasingly international trade with canned and processed foods. But there's a lot of work and when we talk food and circularity, we mean cycling on the natural platform. And then there's sort of manufactured goods, and I don't know what your experience is to what extent that's dominated by imports made in China maybe, or made in Europe and brought into the consumer markets here. And are you asking also for more local design in the first place that then also is locally circular? So just to nuance that back to you. But do you want to just comment maybe on whether I'm understanding you correctly there between products in the sort of food systems and then consumer goods, or are you also thinking longer infrastructure?
Yeah, well, I think we're in the same line. I mean, for example, if you take electronic waste, a good majority of it, almost 99% of it, is not produced in the continent, but end up as a hazardous waste or a complex waste stream in the continent. And then the capacity of waste treatment facilities is not yet developed, so they end up in the landfill. So how do we find solutions for those kind of things? Yeah, it's just a question to reflect on. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Bezawit. Of course, yeah, the e-waste is one of those sectors that really stands out very strongly in how we're observing a very linear economy and very high tech, of course, and not everybody can make these materials. Esther, so my little dog is starting to say there's something wrong. So I'm going to mute again and ask Esther whether you wanted to add to that. And if I'm away for a moment, that's just to get the guy out of the house.
Thanks, Arro. Yeah, well, my research questions would come from my field of industrial ecology. They are therefore not exclusive. There are all kinds of research questions that are very relevant and interesting besides that, but they're just not my area of expertise. So I would like to start from the urban mine. We really don't know a lot about the urban mine. We don't know how much is in there. We don't know where it is. We don't know how much it is. We don't know how it comes out, when it comes out, what happens to it. So basically all the steps that geological companies have to go through when they're starting a mine have to be gone through also for the urban mine. Start out with having a look around, is this area promising? Then you do prospecting, then you do making a guess of whether it's worthwhile actually starting the endeavor. Then you have to put all kinds of things in place. You have to make a business plan, you have to make a mining plan, you have to get the permit, hire the workers, etc. All those steps have to be gone through also for the urban mine, and they haven't yet. And it's also still quite unclear how they would look like. They would be quite different for the urban mine compared to the geological mine. And that whole understanding of the urban mine, we are still at the earliest stages. We're now in the phase of prospecting. How much is there? And when will it come out? That's the phase that we are in. But all the rest still has to come.
Esther, thank you very much for that suggestion as a research agenda. And having attempted to convene a master's program in sustainable mining, it's been amazing. It's often the geologists that come in and want to take the course. And then one of the key topics really always is, who are the stakeholders of that mine, and how do you design a mine for shared value with those who actually live there? So maybe we must be careful that when we think about the urban mine, we work that in with the stakeholders right from the word go, and not just focus on the mineralogy and the geology, but also on the sociology of the urban mine. But yeah, great point. I think we're going to be aiming to wrap up towards 4 o'clock. There's a couple new messages that have popped up. Let's see, there's a comment from Sarah. Useful to explore at the continental, regional, and country level. Yeah, was that? I'm kind of not getting all my comments together now. Rose on research. What works and what doesn't work on the continent. Okay, great. Yeah. Okay. And yeah, then okay. Now, okay, I've lost my thread on the chat. Ali, please, if I've missed an important point or question, do you want to remind me on that? Willi's hands up, and then we're going to sort of be taking the last 2-3 inputs now. Gareth, I think your hand after that. Thanks. I saw your offer to speak about food waste and food systems and circularity as well. Willi?
Yeah, I mean, I think there is a strong bias in the circular economy in the industrialized countries, in the countries they already sit on quite some resources in urban mining, and I think there is a huge need to expand on this. At the same time, I think it's neglected to look what does it mean in an African context. So on the one hand, when you look, for example, into housing, how might be a future housing development take place in South Africa? Are the rural housing that are not always the best sorts, how can they be further developed without becoming a kind of so to say leapfrogging, without becoming a first kind of industrialized housing structures like corrugated roofs and simple shacks? How can we come to much better housing that uses the resources that are available, and how can this done in order to offer future activities for reuse or recycling? Yeah. Or the same issues with mobility. What might be a good way of developing certain mobilities structures in South Africa or in Africa that are not just based on car mobility, where we know all the problems that come with that. Yeah. So I think these are issues where you can say, in the African context, there is a lot of traditional kind of reuse and circularity of the material. But as there is some development, runs the danger to become the same like in the industrialized countries, where you leave the pathway of circularity. Yeah? So what would be the most appropriate and best way of developing certain kind of need satisfaction in the essential areas that are based on circularity kind of principles? And of course, there are the big issues like in South Africa, how to get out of the coal mining, yeah, and how to get out of the big metal mining, yeah, and when you do so, how can you use infrastructure that was used for that in future for a broader kind of audience, and how can you, yeah, build houses out of it or whatsoever. So I think there is a huge gap in that area.
Thank you very much, Willi. So some pathways research I hear there. Gareth?
Thanks, Aaron. I thought I'd just hearing this and seeing some of the comments on food. So my work is specifically on urban food. And I think to go back to one of the original questions that was asked around sort of what is cities happening, and food allows me to ask a question around mandates. And so in my work with cities, very few city departments see food as their mandate. Although informal economy, vending allowances, infrastructure, all these multiple areas are actually food mandates, but never described as such. So one of the challenges we found is that food is often viewed as being a rural question, and certainly from a flows point of view, we can measure the metabolic flows, and Harrow, we've shared students who've done fantastic work on this. But it's actually in the governance question around trying to enable and facilitate that circular economy. In South Africa and a lot of colonial kind of Africa, we still locked into racially Fordist industrialized systems that hold a particular trajectory, and it's very difficult to untangle those. And with this rural focus on food, and despite whatever the figures quoted around urbanization, cities are not necessarily engaging in this urban food question in a way. And I think that limits the ability to create those circular opportunities. And just when we start reflecting on how multiple systems intersect, we see a number of opportunities through departments like the Resilience Department that are by nature transversal. But just to kind of accentuate that point, the CSIR, and if it's of interest to anyone, the South African CSIR has just produced a report on food waste, which puts out figures, although it is aggregated by different types of food, at about 50% of South Africa's food is wasted. If you take that with a stunting figure of 25%, that's been pretty locked in for a long period of time, we see this kind of real tension that we're facing and the challenge that we face. So yeah, I think for me, it's what are mandates the urban space present from a kind of question around the circular economy when these flows are moving in and out and there isn't a mandate to do that at the urban scale, and how are these rapidly urbanizing African cities able to take on more mandates given the political economy of governance and decentralization and all those other challenges.
Thanks very much, Gareth. I think there's a lot in that intervention there that we've hopefully captured, and that will help shape our positioning towards the next workshop and towards the summit. Thanks. And then Sarah, your hand's up, and it's the last one I'm going to take as we're coming towards 4 o'clock, and then we'll just do the wrap up.
Thanks, Sarah. I think I was just reflecting a little bit on some of my last thoughts, and I think this builds a little bit on what Gareth was saying, but maybe not so much just thinking about food, but thinking more broadly, and thinking about the study that Willi shared as well. And I think one of the big questions and things to think about in a research program is the difference, or how you'd intervene differently in informal flows, or flows that are moving informally compared to flows that are moving more formally through an economy. So, for example, through the private sector, material flows, you could probably say, are moving more formally through the system, where in an informal settlement, you have material flows that are often moving more informally. And that's quite different the intervention points might then be quite different. And most of what has been published on the circular economy is around how materials flow in a formal economy. And so I think then it asks questions around, okay, well, like who has the power and influence to change material flows within those two different parts of the economy, within the informal economy and within the formal economy. And considering that most of Africa's growth is likely to be more in an informal economy space based on the way that populations are currently growing on the African continent. I think that's a kind of really fundamental to the circular economy transition in Africa. I hope I've articulated that all right, not as well as what I've put in the chat, but it's something I think about often.
Thank you very much, Sarah. And again, I'm sure that Edgar and his colleagues at the African Centre of Cities who have long and deep engaged with informal economies and places of work will be thinking about what circular economy means in that. And I think, you know, even if I take it back to Esther's encouragement to study the urban mine a lot more, we know that a lot of the urban mine workers work under very informal conditions, and you know, so that takes it through back to Willi's interjection on or intervention about the cost of labor relative to the value of materials and energy. So I think we've harvested a lot today from our panelists and from the questions and discussion. There's a bit of workup, Edgar, on what we've heard. And to help us build up this series, I think next the idea is that we do get some intelligence from particular case studies in the next workshop. Edgar, before we close, your thoughts here as having conceived of this, has this gone part of the way down where you wanted to be at the end of today?
Thanks, Harro. So I think part of, so I'm feeling torn all over the place, to be honest. And I think that's very normal and appropriate for the topic under consideration. And because we're talking about a genuinely interdisciplinary domain that is still ill-defined, I would say, in the African context. So, I think it's going to be really productive to move to the case studies in the next workshop, because it will allow us to be a lot more grounded, a lot more specific, and then from that point to move back up to some of the abstracted frameworks to try and figure out what would be a coherent and productive way to think about the research agenda. For me, though, what has been striking is I guess the sense that there is a lot of potential here to make an enormous impact in a relatively short space of time. But we've got to look at what's been happening in other world regions. We've got to try and take the principles of good transdisciplinary methodologies on board. And we've got to remain grounded in some of the specificities of the African context. Informality in particular has been the one issue. And then obviously, you know, the sort of dramatic rates of urbanization and the transformation also of food systems and agricultural economies. So yes, I'm more than happy. If anything, my plate is too full. So I think there's quite a lot to process over the next 2 weeks, but it's been incredibly generative, and I'm very appreciative that our speakers took the task so seriously and that we got really rich offerings from them. So thank you, Harold, also for chairing.
Thanks very much, Edgar. And unless there's anybody who objects and said this thing was programmed to run till 4:15, I think it's time to start the checkout. And I want to afford each of our speakers a checkout opportunity. You know, you've been asked to do some work for us without any compensation. So thank you very much for that. But yeah, if you want to tell us where you're going next and maybe what you took out of today, and whether you might join us on the case studies, but you don't have to. You don't have to commit to further time on. I'm sure you're all very busy too. But yeah, in the order that you spoke, Ester and Willi and Bezawit, and then I'm going to ask Sarah, since Rose has already left, to just check out from today's workshop.
All right. I'm not quite sure what you expect from me, Haro, but I enjoyed the session a lot today. I'm very interested to learn a bit more about the African perspective. Me being from Europe and having worked mostly at that level, and also, yeah, very abstract indeed at the global level. I think that yeah, if you move down to the local level, there's always a lot of things that are not average and that are very particular, and those have to be taken into account whenever you set up schemes to further things like the circular economy. And I think maybe the challenge is to look for opportunities where problems are, so to say. I've said this once to a PhD student of mine from China, and China issued a ban on the import of e-waste because they thought, the world was dumping their waste on them. And then I said, well, you can also regard it as a new source of materials, because mines in China, they are being exhausted, and at a certain moment in time you want to have a new source of materials, things like that. So look at things in a different way depending on the situation where you are. May be very useful.
Thank you, Esther, and enjoy the rest of your afternoon. And Willi, you physically checked out of South Africa a little while ago. Nice to have you back in. Quick check out for today.
Yeah, I mean, it's always very interesting to see how diverse Africa is in many respects, and I think so were the perspectives today. Yeah, so you have everything in South Africa. You have a highly modern, technology-oriented areas. You have touristy areas. You have areas with informal settlements. In urban areas, you have rural areas. So there's a huge variety, and I think this is a challenge for SDGs and the circular economy. So the approach one size fits all doesn't fit to Europe, but if it doesn't fit to Europe, it doesn't fit to Africa at all. Yeah, so that is something that became quite clear, and I thought maybe it would be an interesting exercise to approach the issue from a different angle as well, to look from the SDGs and which of the SDGs are really the pressing ones, and what can the circular economy offer here, yeah, to turn it around in a way. Maybe this could be an interesting exercise as well. I say as well because it was very interesting today, and I'm very happy to take something with me from this meeting. Thank you.
It's great. Thanks, because we know you've got an interest in this country and in academic work here, so thanks. And now Bezawit, your checkout.
Okay, so for me, what I took and what I was also anticipating is knowledge is power. Huh? The better knowledge you have, the more focused research and development activities an institution does, the better we're able to cope up and adapt. So the more we learn, the more we have the capacity to address the issues at hand, whether we are in every level of society. So I would say at the end of the day, that's what the role of universities are, and that's what I also learned, and that's what I will also be building up in the future. And as I said, ESSEN is a volunteer network of non-profit organization, and we do have quite a lot of expertise who are volunteering their time to do research and this kind of questions. So we'd be very much interested to collaborate in any sector that you wish. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And you kind of put in a hope that a lot of learning will happen through the universities, which I think gives me a perfect platform to ask Sarah to check out herself and the colleagues from the Ellen MacArthur Foundation, who showing us up with their great educational offerings that the university, as we know it, is a thing of the past. With your course coming up in October, good luck for that. But Sarah, your checkout for today.
Thanks, Sarah. I think I'd probably start with by echoing Edgar's point that there seems to be a real moment around circular economy in Africa. There's growing political momentum through the African Circular Economy Alliance. There's been lots of ground up momentum through circular economy practitioners that the African Circular Economy Network represents so well. And I think I'd say kind of as my last point that maybe from my global perspective, I might say that our Latin American colleagues are maybe slightly ahead of us in Africa. And so there's perhaps, as well as an opportunity to learn from circular economy in very consolidated Europe, there is also an opportunity to learn from colleagues in Latin America who have far more of a similar context to us and have been doing this for just a little bit longer.
Thank you so much. Just what I need to hear as I start a new center together with colleagues in Colombia and Germany, funded by German exchange money, on transitions and using transdisciplinary approaches. But I didn't want to check out on a personal note. That is also a global academic development. But yeah, I really enjoyed being in the chair today. Next time around, I'm going to have pleasure of doing a particular input, and I'll be sitting in the background also trying to take notes that Edgar did today. And Edgar, I think you'll be in the chair for the next workshop. We'd be delighted if many of you could join us then for the second workshop and also in the summit sessions. So with that, I think we've said hopefully everything that must be said, and I wish you a good afternoon further. If there's something that should have been said that I didn't, then Ali or Edgar, please say it before everyone's out of the room. Thank you.
Thanks, Sarah, for sharing.